My name is Denise Hall. I am 31 years old, a captain in the military police stationed at Fort Liberty. I have spent my entire youth protecting this country, standing guard on foreign soil, yet I couldn't protect the one person who mattered most, my own mother. From the monsters disguised as family. I never thought a simple reunion dinner would turn into an active crime scene. It happened the moment I refused to hand over $15,000 of my blood money, savings earned in the desert heat, to fund my addict stepbrother's wedding. My stepfather, Gary, didn't hesitate. He screamed, "Hold her, Tyler. Teach this ungrateful bitch a lesson." I felt the wind of a heavy glass ashtray sailing past my face, slicing the skin above my eyebrow. Blood trickled into my eye, blurring my vision, but I saw him clearly. Tyler, the brother I used to carry on my hip when we were kids. He lunged at me, fist cocked high, growling like a feral animal. In the corner, my mother, Linda, just curled into a ball, her hands clamped over her mouth to stifle a sob. They thought a lone woman would crumble. They thought they had me cornered. But they forgot one fatal detail. I had just come off shift, and my standard issue Axon body cam was still blinking green. Let me know what state you are listening from in the comments and hit that subscribe button right now if you believe that when a family becomes a battlefield, love needs to be replaced by martial law. The suspension of my old Ford F-150 groaned as I pulled into the driveway of the house on the outskirts of Fayetteville, North Carolina. It was a humid evening, the kind that makes your uniform stick to your back. I cut the engine, but I didn't get out immediately. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, staring at the house I grew up in. They had painted the siding a cheerful shade of blue, trying to mask the rot inside. But I knew better. The air around this place always felt heavy, like the pressure before a thunderstorm that never breaks. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a stark contrast to the calm exterior I was trained to maintain. My hand drifted up, fingers brushing the cold metal of the captain's bars pinned to my chest. It was a grounding technique. I am Captain Denise Hall, I told myself. I command respect. In my head, the voice of Jocko Willink, whose podcast got me through my toughest deployments, echoed, "Calm is contagious." "Breathe, Denise," I whispered. "No shortcuts. Just discipline." I grabbed my duffel bag and stepped out. I was still in my fatigues, boots laced tight. I hadn't even had time to change after a 12-hour shift dealing with a domestic dispute on base. The irony wasn't lost on me. As I opened the front door, the smell hit me first. It wasn't the smell of home cooking. It was the stale, sour stench of cheap beer and cigarette smoke that had settled into the drywall over 2 decades. "Look who finally decided to grace us with her presence," a voice boomed from the living room. Gary, my stepfather. He didn't get up. He was sprawled in his recliner, feet propped up on the coffee table, a half-empty can of beer dangling from his hand. Next to him sat Tyler, my 26-year-old stepbrother, mirroring his father's posture. They were watching a football game, the volume turned up loud enough to rattle the windows. Neither of them looked at me. In the kitchen, my mother, Linda, was hunched over the stove. She looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders curved inward as if she were trying to disappear. She was serving dinner like a maid, terrified of making a sound. "Hi, Mom," I said softly, stepping into the kitchen. She flinched, then turned with a weak, watery smile. "Oh, Denise, you're here. Sit, sit. The pot roast is ready." We moved to the dining table. It was a tense affair. The only sound was the scraping of silverware and the wet smacking noises Gary made as he chewed. The pot roast was cold, the gravy congealed into a greasy film on the plate. It tasted like the atmosphere in the room, loveless and heavy. Gary wiped grease from his chin with the back of his hand and finally looked at me. His eyes didn't meet mine. They drifted to my uniform, narrowing with disdain. "Still wearing that G.I. Joe costume, huh?" Gary sneered, stabbing a piece of carrot. "You think that makes you special? You think you're some kind of hero?" I kept my eyes on my plate, slicing my meat with surgical precision. "It's my job, Gary. I came straight from work." "Work?" Tyler scoffed, his mouth full. Writing tickets for speeding on base isn't real work, Denise. You're basically a mall cop with a better costume. At least I have a job, Tyler, I shot back, my voice level. How's the job hunt going? Or are you still finding yourself on Gary's couch? Tyler slammed his fork down. I'm an entrepreneur, okay? I have prospects. And besides, I'm busy planning the wedding. It's going to be at the Hilton downtown. Top tier, classy. I almost choked. Tyler had been unemployed for 2 years. He couldn't afford a burger at McDonald's, let alone a wedding at the Hilton. That sounds expensive, I said, glancing at Mom. She was staring intently at her soup bowl, refusing to look up. That was the signal. I knew it. This wasn't a dinner. It was an ambush. Gary cleared his throat, the sound like gravel grinding together. He finished his beer and crushed the can in his hand, setting it on the table with a definitive clack. Speaking of the wedding, Gary started, his tone shifting from mocking to demanding. We ran the numbers. We're a little short. How short? I asked, though I already knew I wouldn't like the answer. 15,000, Gary said. He said it casually, like he was asking to borrow $5 for gas. I know you just got that deployment bonus from your little trip to the sandbox. Go to the bank tomorrow, draw it out, give it to your brother. The room went dead silent. The audacity stole the breath from my lungs. That money wasn't just a bonus. It was hazard pay. It was months of sleeping in a tent, missing birthdays, dodging IEDs, and living in a constant state of hypervigilance. That money was my down payment for a small house, my escape plan. I looked at my mother. Mom, did you know about this? She trembled. Denise, honey, it's for family. Tyler needs a good start. I can't do that, Gary, I said, my voice firm. That money is my savings. I'm buying a house next month. Gary's face turned a deep shade of purple. He slammed his fist onto the table, making the silverware jump. Your money, he roared, spittle flying across the table. Your money is this family's money. Who put a roof over your head when your deadbeat father died? Me. I raised you, I fed you, and now you're going to nickel and dime me? You selfish, ungrateful wretch. I've paid my way since I was 18. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I send Mom money every month. I'm not financing a party for Tyler. It's not a party, it's my wedding, Tyler yelled, jumping up. He was swaying slightly. I could smell the bourbon on him from across the table. You've always been jealous of me. You think you're better than us because you went to college and joined the army. You're just a jealous bitch. Watch your mouth, Tyler, I warned, my command voice slipping out. Gary stood up slowly, his eyes cold and predatory. He looked at Tyler and nodded toward me. She needs to learn respect, Gary hissed. Teach your sister a lesson, son. Show her who runs this house. It happened in slow motion. Tyler, fueled by liquid courage and his father's toxic permission, lunged across the corner of the table. He grabbed the collar of my uniform, bunching the fabric in his fist. Give me the money, he screamed, raising his right hand to slap me. A move he had used on girlfriends before, a move he used to use on me when we were teenagers. But I wasn't a teenager anymore, and I wasn't a victim. My training took over instantly. No thought, just reaction. As his hand came down, I stepped inside his guard. My left forearm blocked his strike, deflecting it harmlessly. Simultaneously, my right hand clamped onto his wrist, twisting it sharply outward while I drove my shoulder into his chest. It was a standard MP takedown maneuver. Leverage over strength. Tyler yelped as his balance vanished. I swept his leg and drove him into the hardwood floor. Thud. The house shook. Tyler hit the ground hard, the air rushing out of his lungs in a wheeze. I held his arm in a lock against his back, pinning him down with my knee. Stay down, I ordered. Do not move. My heart was pounding, adrenaline flooding my system. I looked up, expecting Gary to be rushing me next. I was ready to fight them both if I had to. But Gary wasn't attacking. He was standing by the wall, a terrifyingly calm smile playing on his lips. It was the smile of a man who had just been handed a loaded weapon. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket. He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with malice, and then he tapped the screen. He put the phone to his ear, and in a split second, his demeanor changed. His face crumbled into a mask of sheer terror. He began to hyperventilate, fake tears welling in his eyes. 911, he screamed into the phone, his voice trembling with a performance worthy of an Oscar. Please, send help. It's my daughter. She's a soldier. She's having an episode. She's crazy. She just tried to kill her brother. There's blood everywhere. Oh God, please hurry before she kills us all. I froze. My knee was still on Tyler's back, but a cold chill, colder than any winter night, washed over me. He wasn't just trying to steal my money. He was trying to destroy my life. The wail of sirens cut through the heavy air of the living room like a knife. Red and blue lights strobed against the drawn curtains, painting the room in a chaotic rhythm. It was in that exact moment, as heavy boots crunched on the gravel driveway, that I witnessed a terrifying transformation. Gary, who seconds ago had been standing over me with a predatory grin, sprang into action. He grabbed his own greasy hair, roughing it up until he looked disheveled. With a violent jerk, he tore the collar of his flannel shirt, popping a button that skittered across the hardwood floor. Then, he dropped to his knees beside Tyler and let out a theatrical sob. Before the door opened, Gary turned his head toward me. The fear on his face vanished, replaced by pure, venomous hatred. "You're dead, you little bitch," he hissed. "I'm going to take your rank. I'm going to take your job. I'm going to make sure you rot in a cell." Then, the mask slammed back into place. "Officer, thank God!" Gary screamed as the door burst open, his voice cracking with fake hysteria. He cradled Tyler's head like a grieving father. "Help us. My daughter. She's snapped. She's got PTSD. She's trying to kill us." Two police officers from the Fayetteville PD stormed in. Officer Ruiz, the lead, had his hand hovering over his taser. "Police, let me see your hands. Everyone stay where you are," Ruiz barked. His eyes landed on me immediately. I didn't flinch. My training kicked in. I snapped to attention, my back rigid, and raised my hands slowly to shoulder height, palms open. My face was a mask of absolute neutrality. "I am unarmed, officer," I stated calmly. "I am complying." The contrast was jarring. Me, a military police captain, standing perfectly still in uniform. Gary, disheveled, weeping, smelling of stale beer. And Tyler, curled on the floor, moaning for the audience. And Mom, huddled in the corner, hands over her ears, sobbing quietly in utter defeat. "She attacked him," Gary wailed, pointing at Tyler's bleeding nose. "She came in demanding money for drugs. When I said no, she went crazy. Look at my boy." Officer Ruiz's eyes narrowed. He looked at me, then Gary. I could see the calculation. Domestic disturbance, veteran, accusation of drugs, and PTSD. It was a narrative he knew well. "Ma'am, step away. Keep your hands visible," Ruiz ordered. "Understood," I said, stepping back. Ruiz separated us, standard procedure. He took Gary into the kitchen. I stood by the window, staring at the flashing lights, hearing Gary's voice drift through the thin walls. He wasn't just lying. He was weaving a tapestry of destruction. "It's been getting worse since she got back from deployment," Gary whispered conspiratorially. "She's hooked on those painkillers, opioids. The army hides it, but we know. Tonight, she said she wished she had her service weapon so she could finish the job." My stomach churned. It was a lie so vile it took my breath away. He was weaponizing the very real struggles of my brothers and sisters in arms against me. He knew that unstable veteran with a gun was a code red for any cop. "Lying lips are abomination to the Lord." The verse from Proverbs flashed through my mind. Gary was a walking blasphemy. Tyler caught my eye and smirked, a fleeting expression of triumph before letting out another groan. "My arm. I think she broke my arm." Minutes later, Ruiz returned, his face grim. "Captain Hall," he said, acknowledging my rank. "Your stepfather is making serious allegations. Aggravated assault, domestic violence, threats against life." "They are false allegations," I replied steady. "I acted in self-defense. My stepbrother attacked me when I refused to give them money." Ruiz sighed, rubbing his neck. Look, Captain, I see a bleeding man and a distraught father. And I see you, without a scratch, in North Carolina, without independent witnesses. He glanced at my mother. Did she see what happened? My heart leaped. Yes, ask her. Ruiz walked over to Mom. Ma'am? Mrs. Holton? Can you tell me what happened? Did your daughter attack your son? The room went silent. Gary stepped out of the kitchen, leaning against the doorframe. He didn't speak. He just stared at Mom with dark, flat eyes, a look that promised retribution. If you speak, you pay. Mom looked up, terrified. She looked at Ruiz, then Gary, and finally me. She stammered, hands shaking. I was in the kitchen. I didn't see anything. I just heard yelling. My heart shattered. She was so broken by that monster she couldn't even defend her own child. She chose survival over truth. Ruiz walked back to me. Captain Hall, it's a he said, she said. I can't arrest you without evidence. But your stepfather wants to press charges. He's demanding a report. I understand, I said, feeling a cold numbness. Pressing charges meant an investigation. My commanding officer would be notified. My security clearance, my career. Everything was hanging by a thread. I'm writing this as a domestic disturbance for now, Ruiz said. But I suggest you leave the premises immediately. I will leave. Gary stood behind Ruiz. As the officer turned away, Gary looked at me. He mouthed 4 words. I told you so. I didn't scream. I didn't lunge. That's what he wanted, for me to lose control and prove his lie true. Instead, I grabbed my duffel bag and walked out. The humid night air felt cleaner than the air inside. As I walked to my truck, despair threatened to pull me under. The injustice burned like acid. I had served my country, done everything right. Yet a liar was inside drinking my mother's coffee, while I was treated like a criminal. Before we move on, I need you to do something. If you have ever been the bad guy, just because you stood up for yourself, hit that like button right now. And in the comments, type, I stand, to let me know I'm not alone. I climbed into my truck. My hands trembled as the adrenaline faded. I looked back at the house. Gary was probably celebrating his victory. But as I stared at the dark windows, my hand brushed against my chest pocket. I felt the hard, rectangular outline of something plastic through my uniform. The despair vanished. Gary thought he had won. He thought he had silenced the only witness, but he forgot about the witness that doesn't feel fear. The witness that doesn't lie. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was planning, and God help him when I executed that plan. Gary didn't wait. He didn't even let the sun fully rise over the pine trees of North Carolina before he launched his next attack. He knew he couldn't beat me in a physical fight. I was younger, stronger, and trained to neutralize threats. So, like the coward he was, he decided to hit me where I couldn't defend myself with martial arts. He went for my livelihood. He went for my honor. At 800 hours, while I was on the parade deck at Fort Liberty overseeing a morning drill for new recruits, a call was coming into the Provost Marshal's office. Gary Holton, playing the role of the terrified, law-abiding citizen, was on the line. He wasn't drunk this time. His voice was steady, sober, and laced with a calculated concern that would have fooled anyone who didn't know the devil beneath the skin. I'm afraid for my life, sir, Gary told the dispatcher, his voice recorded on the emergency line. My stepdaughter, Captain Denise Hall. She has unauthorized weapons. She's been talking about ending things, about taking people with her. She threatened to kill the whole family last night. If the army doesn't intervene, I'm terrified she's going to cause a massacre. He knew the trigger words. Unauthorized weapons. Mental instability. Mass shooting threat. In the modern military climate, those words were nuclear. They bypassed all red tape and triggered an immediate, zero-tolerance response. I was barking orders at a platoon of privates, correcting their formation, when I saw a Humvee from the Military Police Investigations Unit pull up onto the grass. 2 MPs stepped out. They weren't smiling. They weren't my friends from the mess hall. They were on duty, and their faces were grim. One of them was Sergeant Miller, A man I had shared coffee with just 2 days ago. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Captain Hall, Miller said, his voice stiff. I need you to step away from the platoon. The recruits stopped their drill. 100 pairs of eyes turned to watch. The silence on the parade deck was deafening. Is there a problem, Sergeant? I asked, keeping my voice calm, though my heart began to hammer against my ribs. Ma'am, per order of Colonel Alden, you are to be escorted to headquarters immediately, Miller said. Then he took a breath, like he hated what he was about to say. I am also ordered to relieve you of your sidearm, temporarily. The air left my lungs. To be disarmed in front of subordinates is the ultimate humiliation for an officer. It's a public declaration that you are no longer trusted, that you are a threat. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a burning shame that pricked at my eyes. I unholstered my M17 pistol slowly, cleared the chamber, and handed it to Miller butt first. My hands were shaking, just barely, but enough for me to feel it. Am I under arrest? I asked quietly. Not yet, ma'am, just detained for questioning regarding a serious allegation. As I walked to the Humvee, flanked by 2 MPs like a common criminal, I could feel the recruits whispering behind me. 12 years of service. 12 years of perfect conduct, of sacrifice, of missed holidays and lonely nights. All of it stained in an instant by the lies of a man who had never served a day in his life. The drive to HQ was a blur. My mind was racing, spiraling into panic. What did he say? How can they believe him? I tried to channel David Goggins. When you think you're done, you're only at 40% of your body's capability. But my mind wasn't tired. It was terrified. We arrived at Colonel Alden's office. The colonel was a man I respected more than anyone. He was a father figure to me, a man of absolute integrity. Being summoned to his office was usually an honor. Today, it felt like walking to the gallows. I was ushered in. The door clicked shut behind me. Colonel Alden didn't ask me to sit. He was standing by the window, looking out, his back to me. On his desk lay a thick manila folder. Sir, Captain Hall reporting as ordered, I said, snapping a salute. Alden turned slowly. His face wasn't angry. It was worse. It was disappointed. At ease, Denise, he said, his voice heavy. He picked up the folder and tossed it onto the desk. It landed with a heavy thud that echoed in the silent room. Gary Holton, your stepfather. Yes, sir. He sent an email to the base commander this morning, 5 pages long, Alden said, tapping the folder. Attached are photos of your brother, Tyler, with a broken nose and a bruised wrist, and a statement from Gary claiming you assaulted them in a psychotic rage over an inheritance dispute. That is a lie, sir, I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. It was self-defense. They tried to rob me. He claims you have an opioid addiction, Alden continued, ignoring my defense. He claims you threatened to use your service weapon to clean house. He's demanding a full CID investigation. He's threatening to go to the press if we don't act. Alden leaned forward, his steel-gray eyes boring into mine. You know the UCMJ, Captain, Article 133, conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman. If even half of this is true, if you engaged in domestic violence, you're done. Dishonorable discharge, loss of pension, federal prison time. Sir, please, I pleaded, desperation creeping into my voice. Gary is a narcissist. He's doing this because I cut him off financially. I have never touched drugs. I have never threatened anyone. I want to believe you, Denise, Alden said, his voice softening just a fraction. I really do. But in today's climate, with domestic violence accusations, my hands are tied. Unless you have proof, solid, undeniable proof, I have to suspend your clearance pending an investigation. The room spun. Suspended clearance. That was the death knell. Even if I was cleared months later, the stigma would never leave. My career was over. I thought about my pension, the money I used to pay for Mom's insulin. I thought about the health insurance that covered her. I thought about the house I was supposed to buy next month. Gary had calculated this perfectly. He knew that without the army, I was nothing. He wanted to break me, to strip me of my identity, to make me crawl back to him just like Mom did. He wanted to turn me into a failure so he could control me. I felt a wave of nausea. The walls of the office seemed to be closing in. I was trapped. I was alone. I was going to lose everything because a drunkard decided to ruin me. Think, the inner voice screamed. You are a soldier. Think. What do I have? My word against his? No good. Mom's testimony. She's too scared. My clean record? Irrelevant against a DV charge. I looked down at my uniform. The same uniform Gary had mocked last night. The uniform I had worn straight from work to that hellish dinner. Wait. My hand twitched. I felt a phantom pressure against my chest. Last night. I hadn't changed. I had driven straight there. I remembered unclipping the heavy battery pack of my body cam when I got to the car. But I didn't leave it at the station. I had been in a rush. I had shoved the SD card into my pocket to upload later, per protocol for sensitive domestic disputes. My hand moved slowly, almost involuntarily, to my left breast pocket. My fingers brushed against the Velcro flap. I felt it. A small, hard square of plastic. Cold, sharp-edged. The world stopped spinning. The noise in my head went silent. I looked up at Colonel Alden. The fear in my chest evaporated, replaced by a cold, burning clarity. Gary had made one mistake. He thought I was just a daughter. He forgot I was a cop, and cops collect evidence. Sir, I said, my voice no longer trembling. You said you need proof? Alden looked at me, confused by the sudden change in my demeanor. Yes, proof. I undid the Velcro on my pocket. The sound, reap, was loud in the quiet office. I reached in and pulled out the small black memory card. I held it up between two fingers like a holy relic. I forgot to turn it off, I whispered, a ghost of a smile touching my lips. It's all here, sir. Every word. Every lie. The silence in Colonel Alden's office was thick enough to choke on. He was staring at the small black SD card I held between my fingers, his expression unreadable. To him, it was just a piece of plastic. To me, it was my life. You said you forgot to turn it off? Alden asked, his voice skeptical but curious. Yes, sir, I replied, keeping my hand steady. Per your new directive regarding officer safety during commutes, I kept my Axon unit active until I reached a secure location. When I arrived at my mother's house, I was distracted by the immediate hostility. I never powered it down. I stepped forward and placed the card on the glass surface of his mahogany desk. It made a tiny click sound. This is the raw footage, sir. Unedited, encrypted, time-stamped. It will show you exactly who the aggressor was. Alden looked at the card, then at me. He let out a long, heavy sigh, the kind that comes from a man who has seen too much deception in his career. He reached for the card. If this is what you say it is, Captain, he muttered, inserting it into a card reader connected to his secure terminal. Then Gary Holton is about to have a very bad day. He turned the large monitor on his desk so I could see it too. He clicked the file. The screen went black for a second, then burst into life with the grainy, wide-angle view of my body cam. 8/14 2023. 18:42 hours. The audio kicked in immediately, crystal clear high-definition sound. Give me the money. Tyler's voice filled the office, slurred and aggressive. On the screen, his face was distorted with rage, his fist raised high. The camera jerked as I flinched back. Stay back, Tyler. Stop! My voice on the recording was loud, authoritative. I wasn't screaming in panic. I was issuing commands. Rules of engagement followed. Then came the scuffle. The camera angle tilted wildly as I blocked his strike. The sickening thud of Tyler hitting the floor echoed through the speakers. Stay down. Do not move. Alden leaned forward, his eyes glued to the screen. He watched as I pinned Tyler. But then, the camera stabilized. It was pointing directly across the room, directly at Gary. On the screen, Gary wasn't scared. He wasn't running to help his son. He was standing by the wall, phone in hand. And then, he smiled. It was a smile that chilled the room, a smirk of pure, calculated malice. Allo 911, Gary's voice rang out, shifting instantly from a grunt of exertion to a high-pitched shriek of terror. "Please, send help. It's my daughter. She's a soldier. She's having an episode." We watched as Gary ruffled his own hair. We watched as he tore his collar. We watched him drop to his knees and fake a sob, all while casting a hateful glare at the camera lens he didn't know was recording. "Son of a bitch," Alden whispered. The video ended. The screen froze on that final image of Gary's face, the mask of a victim, slipping just enough to reveal the predator underneath. For a moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the hum of the computer fan. Then, Colonel Alden exploded. Bam! He slammed his fist onto the desk with such force that his ceramic coffee mug jumped an inch into the air, splashing dark liquid onto the blotter. His face, usually composed, was beet red. "That bastard!" Alden roared, pushing his chair back. He dared to use my office, my MPs, my resources for a personal vendetta." His anger wasn't directed at me anymore. It was a righteous fury, the kind only a commander feels when his troops are attacked dishonorably. He files a false report with a federal agency. Alden paced behind his desk, his hands clenched into fists. He slanders a commissioned officer. He wastes taxpayer money on a witch hunt because you wouldn't give him cash for a wedding. He stopped pacing and looked at me. The disappointment in his eyes was gone, replaced by a fierce, protective pride. "Captain Hall," he said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "You acted with exemplary restraint. You followed the use of force continuum perfectly. You de-escalated. You neutralized the threat without causing excessive harm. And you maintained discipline while that parasite tried to destroy you." "Thank you, sir," I said, feeling the knot in my chest loosen for the first time in 24 hours. "You are cleared, Denise," Alden said firmly, pulling the SD card out and handing it back to me. "Effective immediately. Your sidearm will be returned. The suspension is lifted." He walked back to his desk and picked up the phone. "Get me the Judge Advocate General's office," he barked into the receiver. "And get the Fayetteville police chief on the line. I want to report a case of filing false charges and harassment of a federal officer." He hung up and looked at me with a grim smile. "I'm not going to let this slide. We're going to send a cease and desist letter so heavy it'll crush his mailbox. And if he breathes in your direction again, I'll have the FBI at his door for interfering with military duties." "John 8:32, sir," I said softly, a wave of relief washing over me. "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." "Amen to that, Captain," Alden nodded. "Dismissed. Go get your gun back." I saluted, turned on my heel, and walked out of the office. The air in the hallway felt lighter. The MPs who had escorted me looked confused as I walked past them, head held high, straight to the armory to reclaim my M17. I had won. The evidence was irrefutable. My career was safe. My honor was intact. But as I sat in my car in the parking lot, clipping my holster back onto my belt, the victory began to taste like ash. I closed my eyes, and the image from the video played back in my mind. Not Gary's smirk, not Tyler's fist. It was Mom. In the corner of the frame, blurry and out of focus, was my mother. She was huddled against the china cabinet, her hands over her ears, shaking like a leaf. She looked so small, so terrified. Gary hadn't just lied to the police. He had terrorized her into silence. He was controlling her, draining her, using her fear to feed his own ego. I realized then that this wasn't over. Clearing my name was just the first battle. The war was still raging inside that house. Gary wasn't just a liar. He was a parasite. A tick burrowed deep into the skin of my family, sucking the life out of the host until there was nothing left. And you don't negotiate with a parasite. You don't reason with it. You burn it out. I started the engine of my truck. I wasn't going back to the barracks. I had a new mission now. If Gary wanted to play dirty with money, I was going to find out exactly where the money was going. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number of an old friend in banking. It was time to follow the paper trail. The opportunity came 2 days later. Gary, in his infinite arrogance, had taken Tyler for a tuxedo fitting. He wanted his son to look like royalty for a wedding he couldn't afford. And of course, he was paying for it with credit cards that were likely already maxed out. I watched from down the street in my rental car as Gary's truck pulled away. As soon as they turned the corner, I drove up the driveway. The house felt different when they weren't there. It wasn't angry. It was just sad, cold. I used my key to let myself in. The air conditioning was off to save money, yet the house felt freezing. I found Mom at the kitchen table. She wasn't cooking or cleaning. She was just sitting there, staring at a pile of envelopes. Some were unopened, others were torn open, their contents spilling out like confetti of doom. Final notice, past due, collection agency. Mom, I said softly. She jumped, her hand flying to her chest. Denise, you shouldn't be here. If Gary comes back... He's gone for at least 2 hours, I said, pulling out a chair and sitting opposite her. We need to talk, right now. She looked away, her fingers nervously picking at the edge of a utility bill. About what? There's nothing to talk about. Mom, look at this table. I gestured to the sea of red ink. I need to see the bank accounts. I need to see the savings. Dad's 401k that he left you. Where is it? It's fine, she whispered, her voice trembling. Gary handles the finances. He says he's investing. He says the market is down right now, but it'll bounce back. He says we're going to double our money soon. Investing, I repeated, skepticism dripping from my voice. Mom, Gary hasn't held a steady job in 5 years. What is he investing in? Crypto, she mumbled, and some sports tech company. My stomach dropped. It was the classic script of a financial predator. Open the laptop, Mom, I ordered, my tone leaving no room for argument. Log into the joint account, now. She hesitated, tears welling up in her eyes. He'll be so mad if he finds out. He tried to have me arrested, Mom, I snapped, slamming my hand on the table. He tried to ruin my life. I don't care if he gets mad. Open the damn computer. She flinched, then slowly pulled Gary's laptop toward her. Her hands shook as she typed in the password. Tyler, born, 1 son. Of course. The banking portal loaded. I spun the laptop around so I could see. I didn't just gasp. I felt the blood drain from my face. The screen was a crime scene. The checking account balance, $412. 10. Overdrawn. The savings account, $5. 4. But the real horror was the transaction history. It scrolled down like a litany of sins. BetMGM, 5 noins. BetMGM, 200. BetMGM, $1,000. Gary wasn't investing in tech. He was gambling. Thousands of dollars, gone in seconds on a sports betting app. Then, there were the others. Joe's Liquor Warehouse, 145. The Platinum Club, 300. A strip club downtown. Venmo to Tyler Holton, 500. Venmo to Tyler Holton, 500. Venmo to Tyler Holton, 500. Mom, I whispered, pointing at the screen. He's not investing. He's burning your money. He's giving it to Tyler. He's spending it on strippers and booze. Mom stared at the screen, blinking rapidly as if trying to make the words change. No, that can't be right, he said. And where is Dad's 401k? I clicked on the retirement tab. The page refreshed. Total balance, 0.0 Status, closed. Full withdrawal executed 06/12/2022. It's gone, I said, my voice hollow. All of it, $80,000. Gone. Mom made a sound like a wounded animal, a low keen that vibrated in her chest. My retirement. That was for my care home. That was for... Wait, I said, spotting a notification in the email inbox open in the other tab. The subject line read, Urgent, Reverse Mortgage Default Warning. I clicked it. My heart stopped. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Holton, this is a final notification regarding the reverse mortgage taken out on the property of 124 Oak Street. Due to failure to pay property taxes and insurance as stipulated in the agreement, the loan is in default. Foreclosure proceedings will begin in 30 days unless the balance of $12,000 is paid immediately. Mom, I looked at her, horror washing over me. Did you sign papers for a reverse mortgage? What? No, she cried. I never signed anything. Gary brought some papers home a year ago, but I said no. I said I wanted to leave the house to you. I pulled up the attached PDF of the contract. There, at the bottom, was a signature. Linda Hall Holton. But it wasn't her handwriting. It was shaky. Forced. It was a forgery. He forged your signature, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. He took out a reverse mortgage. He took the equity out of the house. Probably spent that too. And now he hasn't paid the taxes. Mom. The bank is going to take the house. In 30 days. No, Mom whispered. She stood up, swaying on her feet. No, this is my home. Your father built this porch. I raised you here. Look at it, I yelled, turning the screen to face her fully. This is how he loves you. He stole your retirement. He stole your savings. And now he sold your house out from under you to pay for his gambling addiction and Tyler's lifestyle. Mom looked at the red numbers, the zeros, the foreclosure notice. Her face went gray. All the blood left her lips. She clutched her chest, her eyes rolling back slightly, and collapsed onto the sofa. Mom! I rushed to her side. She wasn't having a heart attack. She was having a breakdown. A complete and total collapse of her reality. She curled into a fetal position, burying her face in the cushions, and let out a scream. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated grief. It was the sound of a woman realizing she had slept next to a monster for 10 years. I'm so stupid, she sobbed, her voice muffled. I'm so stupid. I thought he changed. I thought he loved me. You're not stupid, Mom, I said, stroking her hair, feeling a cold, hard rage solidifying in my gut. You were manipulated. You were gaslit. This is financial abuse. I looked around the room, the peeling paint, the old furniture. This house was all she had left of my father. It was her sanctuary. And Gary had pawned it off like a cheap watch. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This was a felony. Wire fraud, forgery, elder abuse. My sadness evaporated. In its place, something else took root. Disgust. Pure, visceral disgust. Gary Holton wasn't a man. He was a parasite. A leech that had attached itself to my mother, draining her dry until she was a husk. And now he was ready to discard her on the street. Mom sat up suddenly, her eyes wild with panic. She reached for her phone on the coffee table. I have to call him, she gasped, her fingers fumbling with the screen. I have to ask him. Maybe there's a mistake. Maybe he can fix it. I watched her, my heart breaking. Even now, after seeing the evidence, her instinct was to go to him, to beg him for a solution to the problem he created. It was the trauma bond talking. I reached out and grabbed her wrist. Hard. Before we see if Linda makes that call, I have a question for you. Have you ever trusted someone with your life, only to find out they were stealing your future behind your back? If you have, or if you just support justice for victims of financial abuse, hit that like button right now. And drop a comment saying, "Protect the vulnerable so we can show the world we are watching." No, I said firmly, looking straight into her terrified eyes. You are not calling him. But Denise, if you call him now, he will lie, I said, my voice dropping to a command whisper. He will spin a story. He will blame the bank. He will blame the economy. Or worse, he will blame you. And then he will drain whatever cash is left in his pocket and disappear. Then what do we do? She wailed. I'm going to be homeless. No, you're not, I said. Because you have me. And I'm a soldier. We don't retreat, we reload. I took the phone from her hand and set it down. Mom, do you want to lose this house, or do you want to fight? She looked at me. For the first time in a decade, I saw a spark in her eyes. It was faint, buried under layers of shame and fear. But it was there. I want to fight, she whispered. Good, I said. Then wipe your tears. We have work to do. Mom's hand hovered over the call button, her thumb trembling. Her face was pale, sweat beading on her forehead despite the chill in the room. I have to ask him, she whispered, her voice cracking with desperation. Maybe Maybe he can explain. Maybe it's a mistake. I moved faster than I had in years. I reached across the kitchen table and snatched the phone from her hand, sliding it into my pocket. No, I said, my voice sharp and commanding. It wasn't a daughter speaking to a mother. It was a soldier speaking to a civilian who was about to walk into a minefield. Give it back, she cried, reaching for me. He's my husband. I need to talk to him. I grabbed her shoulders, my fingers digging into the soft fabric of her cardigan. I forced her to look at me. Her eyes were wild, dilated with panic, the classic look of a victim in the thrall of a trauma bond. Mom, listen to me, I said, keeping my voice steady but intense. Gary is not your husband right now. He is a hostile threat. He is the enemy. If you call him, he will know we know. He will drain whatever is left in that account. He will burn the paper trail. He will disappear. And you will be left with nothing but debt and a foreclosure notice. She slumped in her chair, sobbing into her hands. But I can't do this alone. I'm scared, Denise. I'm so scared. I pulled a chair close to her, our knees touching. I softened my grip on her shoulders, letting my hands rest there gently. I know you are, I said softly. But you're not alone. Not anymore. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. For the first time, she really looked at me. Not as the rebellious teenager she had kicked out at 18 because Gary demanded it. Not as the difficult daughter who refused to lend money. She looked at me and saw the woman I'd become. I'm so sorry, she choked out. I let him chase you away. I chose him over you. I was so blind. And now look at me. I'm 55 years old, and I have nothing. You have me, I said firmly. Why? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why would you help me after everything I let him do to you? I took a deep breath. The anger was there, sure, it always would be. But beneath it was something stronger. Because I took an oath, I said, to protect those who cannot protect themselves, and you are my mother. The Bible says to honor your father and mother, but it also says in Matthew 10:16, be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves. I squeezed her hands. We've been the doves for too long, Mom. It's time to be the serpents. She sniffled, wiping her nose with a tissue. But I'm weak, Denise. I'm not like you. I don't know how to fight. You don't need to know how, I said. You just need to decide to stand up. I thought of Mel Robbins, the motivational speaker whose videos played in the background of my barracks. There is a truth you need to hear, Mom. No one is coming to save you. Gary isn't coming to save you. The bank isn't coming to save you. You have to save yourself. She looked at me, the words sinking in. The harsh reality of it seemed to slap her sober. But, I added, a small smile touching my lips, saving yourself doesn't mean you can't have a weapon. And right now, I am your weapon. Mom took a shuddering breath. She sat up a little straighter. She looked around the kitchen, at the peeling wallpaper, at the empty fridge, at the pile of unpaid bills. I don't want to lose my home, she said, her voice gaining a hint of steel. He took my retirement. He took my dignity. He's not taking my house. That's the spirit, I said. I stood up and grabbed a notepad and a pen from the counter. I slammed them onto the table. We are going to handle this the Army way, I said, uncapping the pen. Strategy and discipline, no emotions, just execution. I wrote a large number 1 on the paper. Phase 1, Intel, I said. We download every bank statement, every email, every text message. We document the forgery on the mortgage papers. We build a file so thick it could kill a man if you dropped it on him. I wrote number 2. Phase 2, legal air support, I continued. I know a lawyer, Margaret Crane. They call her the Iron Lady of Fayetteville. She eats guys like Gary for breakfast. We get her on retainer today. I wrote number 3. Phase 3, the kill shot, I said, looking at Mom. We don't just divorce him. We expose him. We make sure he leaves this marriage with nothing but the shirt on his back and a criminal record. Mom looked at the list. Her hand reached out and took the pen from me. He has a safe, she said quietly. In the garage. He thinks I don't know the combination, but I saw him type it in once. It's his birthday. I grinned. See? You're already a serpent. Open it, she said. Whatever is in there, let's add it to the pile. We spent the next hour raiding our own home. We found cash stashed in envelopes. We found pawn shop receipts for jewelry Mom thought she had lost. We printed bank statements until the printer ran out of ink. By the time we were done, the kitchen table looked like the war room at the Pentagon. Mom signed the power of attorney document I had downloaded and printed. Her signature was firm this time, no shaking. I trust you, Denise, she said, handing me the paper. Do whatever it takes. I will, I promised. I pulled out my phone again. This time, I wasn't calling a friend. I was calling a shark. I dialed the number for Margaret Crane's office. It rang twice. Law offices of Crane and Associates, a receptionist answered. This is Captain Denise Hall, I said, my voice crisp. I need to speak to Margaret Crane immediately. Tell her I have a case involving high-level financial fraud, forgery, elder abuse, and a narcissist who thinks he's smarter than the U.S. Army. There was a pause, and then a click. A moment later, a raspy, smoky voice came on the line. It sounded like whiskey and nails. Captain Hall, Margaret Crane said, you had me at narcissist. Talk to me. I have video evidence of assault, I said, looking at Mom, who was now calmly shredding Gary's credit card offers. I have bank statements showing gambling debts paid with stolen retirement funds. I have a forged reverse mortgage contract. And I have a very angry mother who is ready to burn it all down. Margaret Crane let out a laugh. It was a loud barking sound, a sound of pure delight. Captain, she said, you just described my dream case. I've been bored all week. Bring everything to my office in an hour. I'll clear my schedule. I hung up the phone and looked at Mom. Pack a bag, I said. You're coming with me. We're going to a hotel tonight. When Gary comes home to an empty house and a missing safe, the war officially begins. Mom nodded. She stood up and walked to the bedroom. She didn't look back. The victim was gone. The survivor had taken her place, and Gary Holton had no idea what was coming for him. The week leading up to the wedding was a masterclass in psychological warfare. But for the first time in our lives, Mom and I were the ones holding the trigger. Gary and Tyler thought they had won. They mistook our silence for submission. They interpreted Mom's quiet nodding as defeat. When Gary demanded Mom iron his shirt for the rehearsal dinner, she did it without a word. When Tyler bragged about the honeymoon suite he had booked on a credit card that was technically already defaulted, I just smiled and said, "That sounds lovely, Tyler." They ate it up. Their egos were so inflated they couldn't see the trapdoor opening beneath their feet. On the morning of the rehearsal dinner, Gary cornered me in the hallway. He smelled of Old Spice and arrogance. "You've been quiet lately," he sneered, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Good. Shows you're learning your place. Tonight is important. Sarah's family are snobs. Doctors, lawyers, that type. Don't embarrass me. Don't talk about your job. Just smile and look pretty." I looked at his hand on my shoulder, fighting the urge to snap his wrist. Instead, I looked him in the eye and gave him the most genuine smile I could muster. "Don't worry, Gary," I said sweetly. "Tonight is going to be unforgettable. I promise." He grunted, satisfied, and walked away. He didn't know that my silence wasn't surrender. It was the sound of a cannon being loaded. Back at my off-base apartment, I wasn't getting ready. I was working. My laptop hummed on the kitchen counter, surrounded by empty coffee cups. I wasn't cleaning a weapon or polishing my boots. I was building a bomb. But this bomb was made of pixels and PDF files. I had spent 3 nights scanning every single document Mom and I had unearthed. The bank statements with the negative balances, the forged reverse mortgage contract with the shaky signature, the text messages Gary had sent me over the years, calling me worthless, threatening to kill my dog, threatening to ruin my career. And of course, the pièce de résistance, the body cam footage. I imported everything into a PowerPoint presentation. I titled the file simply, "The Truth About the Holton Family." I edited it like a documentary. Slide 1. The lie, Gary's claims of wealth. Slide 2. The theft, Mom's empty 401k. Slide 3. The fraud, the mortgage. Slide 4. The violence, the video. It was brutal. It was undeniable. It was a 5-minute presentation that would dismantle 2 lifetimes of lies. I saved the file. Then I copied it to 3 separate USB drives. One for my pocket, one for my purse, one for the car. In the military, we call this redundancy. 2 is 1 and 1 is none. If Gary tried to stop one, I'd have 2 more ready to go. At 1600 hours, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Big Mike. Mike was a former Army Ranger I had served with in Afghanistan. He stood 6'4" and was built like a vending machine made of muscle. He now ran a private security firm in Fayetteville. Text: assets in place. We'll be at the Green Valley at 17:30. Front and back exits covered. I typed back, Roger that. Target is hostile. VIP, my mother, is priority. Do not let anyone leave once the show starts. Text: understood. Nobody touches the VIP. See you there, Captain. I set the phone down. I didn't want a brawl. But I knew Gary. When a narcissist is cornered, they don't cry. They attack. And Tyler, drunk on entitlement and probably bourbon, would be unpredictable. I wasn't taking any chances with Mom's safety. It was time to suit up. For a civilian wedding, most sisters would wear a nice dress. Maybe something floral, something that blended in. I went to my closet and pulled out the garment bag that held my dress mess uniform. This is the Army's equivalent of a tuxedo, but far more significant. It's a short, fitted jacket with satin lapels, high-waisted trousers with a gold stripe down the leg, and a cummerbund. It screams formality. It commands authority. I put on the white shirt, fumbling slightly with the studs. I tied the black bow tie. I slipped into the jacket. Then came the medals. I pinned my rack to the left chest. The Bronze Star, the Commendation Medal, the Campaign Medals, each one a testament to discipline, sacrifice, and honor. Concepts Gary and Tyler couldn't even spell. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't Denise, the stepdaughter. She wasn't Denise, the victim. She was Major Select Denise Hall, an officer of the United States Army, and tonight, she was the executioner. I took a deep breath, centering myself. The verses of Psalm 23 came to me, a warrior's prayer. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Amen, I whispered. I grabbed the silver clutch that held nothing but a tube of lipstick and 3 black USB drives. I picked up my laptop bag. I walked out to my truck. The sun was setting, painting the North Carolina sky in hues of bruised purple and angry orange. It felt appropriate. The Green Valley restaurant was a fancy place. White tablecloths, crystal chandeliers, overpriced wine. It was the kind of place Gary loved because it made him look rich. It was the perfect stage for his downfall. I started the engine. My hands were steady on the wheel. Tonight, there would be no yelling, no crying, just cold, hard facts projected on a 10-foot screen. I pulled out of the parking lot and headed toward the Valley of Death. Gary wanted a memorable rehearsal dinner. He was going to get one. The Green Valley restaurant was a vision of manufactured elegance. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto tables set with white linen and polished silver. The air smelled of roasted duck and expensive perfume. Gary was in his element. He stood at the head table, holding a flute of champagne, his face flushed with wine and self-importance. He was giving a toast. Of course he was. When I look at my son, Tyler, Gary boomed, his voice projecting to the back of the room, I see a young man of integrity, a man I raised to be a provider, just like me. And Sarah, well, we are just so honored to welcome such a prestigious family into our humble fold. He raised his glass toward Sarah's parents, Dr. and Mrs. Sterling. They smiled politely, unaware they were being toasted by a man who was technically bankrupt. Tyler sat next to Sarah, looking smug in his rented tuxedo. Sarah looked radiant, twisting the large diamond ring on her finger. The ring I knew was bought with stolen money. I stood in the shadows near the AV booth, watching the performance. My laptop was already plugged into the projector system. The HDMI cable was the fuse. My finger was on the detonator. And I want to thank my lovely wife, Linda, Gary continued, gesturing to Mom, for standing by me while I worked tirelessly to pay for this beautiful evening. It wasn't easy, but for family, I'd spend every dime I have. That was it. The lie was too big to let pass. I stepped out of the shadows. My dress mess uniform caught the light, the gold stripe on my trousers gleaming. Actually, Gary, I said, my voice amplified by the microphone I'd commandeered from the DJ booth, I think it's time we clarified exactly whose dimes you spent. The room went silent. Heads turned. Gary froze, his glass halfway to his mouth. His eyes bulged when he saw me. Denise, he sputtered. What are you doing? Sit down. I have a gift for the happy couple, I said, walking toward the center of the room, my laptop in hand. A special presentation. I think Sarah and her family deserve to know the history of the Holton legacy. Cut the mic, Tyler yelled, standing up. Security, get her out of here. But the security at the door didn't move. Big Mike and his partner stood like statues, arms crossed, blocking the exit. They weren't working for Tyler. I hit the spacebar. The large projection screen behind the head table flickered to life. It wasn't a montage of baby photos. It wasn't a sappy love story. It was a bank statement. Specifically, it was a high-resolution scan of the joint account, with the negative balance highlighted in red. 412. Next was the 4.01k withdrawal records 0.000, and below that, a list of credit card debts totaling $150,000. A gasp rippled through the room. It started as a murmur and grew into a wave of shock. What is this? Dr. Sterling asked, putting on his glasses. This, I said, my voice calm and clinical, is the financial reality of the man who claims to be paying for this dinner. Tonight's meal? Paid for with stolen retirement funds from my mother, Linda Hall. That ring on Sarah's finger? I clicked to the next slide. A credit card statement showing a $5,000 charge at K Jewelers, followed immediately by 3 charges at the Platinum Club. Bought with a credit card taken out in my mother's name without her consent, I finished, along with a few $1,000s in lap dances. Sarah gasped, pulling her hand back as if the ring had suddenly burned her skin. She looked at Tyler. Tyler, is this true? She's lying, Tyler screamed, his face turning a mottled red. She hacked the bank. She's jealous. Am I? I asked. Let's see what kind of man you really are, Tyler. I hit the spacebar again. The screen went black for a second. Then, the audio kicked in. Give me the money. The video from my body cam played on the 10-foot screen. It was loud. It was violent. It was undeniable. The room watched in horrified silence as Tyler, the man of integrity, lunged at his sister with a fist raised. They watched him get slammed to the floor. They heard the wet thud. And then they saw Gary. They saw the smirk. They saw the performance. They heard the lie. She's crazy. She's trying to kill us. Mrs. Sterling stood up, her hand covering her mouth. Oh my God, she whispered. They're monsters. Gary dropped his champagne glass. It shattered on the floor, the sound sharp and final. Turn it off, Gary roared. He looked like a madman, veins bulging in his neck. Turn it off right now, you ungrateful bitch. I'll kill you. He charged. He abandoned all pretense of being a gentleman. He jumped off the dais and sprinted toward me, his hands reaching for the laptop, or maybe my throat. The room screamed. But he never reached me. From the shadows, Big Mike stepped forward. He moved with surprising speed for a man of his size. He didn't tackle Gary. He simply stepped into his path and braced himself. Gary slammed into Big Mike like a bird hitting a windshield. Oof! The impact stopped Gary dead in his tracks. He bounced off Mike's chest and stumbled back, wheezing. Mike didn't even flinch. He just looked down at Gary with the impassive stare of a man who had guarded generals in war zones. Sir, Mike rumbled, his voice deep and threatening. I strongly suggest you do not touch the major. Gary looked at Mike, then at me, then at the crowd. He realized for the first time that he had lost control of the narrative. I didn't flinch. I looked past Gary, straight at Sarah. Sarah, I said, my voice softening. You are a good woman. You come from a good family. Do you really want to marry into this? A family of liars, thieves, and abusers. Look at them. Look at the debt. Look at the violence. Is this the life you want? Sarah was trembling. Tears were streaming down her face, ruining her bridal makeup. She looked at Tyler, who was still standing by the table, looking small and pathetic. Tyler, Sarah said, her voice shaking. Did you know? About the money? About your dad stealing from Linda? Babe, listen, Tyler stammered, holding his hands out. It's complicated. Dad said he had an investment. It's not complicated, Sarah yelled. It's theft. She grabbed her left hand with her right. She yanked the diamond ring off her finger. You are a liar, she spat. And your father is a criminal. She threw the ring. It hit Tyler square in the chest and bounced onto the floor with a hollow clink. It's over, she said. The wedding is off. She turned to her parents. Mom, Dad, let's go. Dr. Sterling stood up, buttoning his jacket. He shot Gary a look of pure disgust. You will be hearing from our lawyers regarding the deposits we paid, he said icily. The Sterling family walked out. The guests followed, murmuring, casting glances of judgment at the Holton men. The room emptied quickly. Soon it was just me, Mom, the security team, and the two broken men. Gary sank to his knees. He wasn't looking at his son. He wasn't looking at his wife. He was staring at the door where the Sterlings had exited. No, he whispered. The money, the connections. He didn't care about love. He didn't care about family. He cared that his golden ticket had just walked out the door. I walked over to him. I stood over him, looking down. You wanted a memorable night, Gary, I said coldly. I hope this was memorable enough for you. I signaled to Mom. She stood up from her table, her head held high. She didn't look at Gary. She walked straight to the door. Come on, Mom, I said. We're leaving. As we walked out into the cool night air, I heard Gary scream. It was a raw, primal sound of rage and impotence. He threw a chair across the empty room. I didn't look back. The stage had been set, the play was over, and the curtains had closed on Gary Holton's life. But I knew, as I unlocked the car door, that a man like Gary wouldn't just scream. When the shock wore off, he would come for blood. And I would be waiting. The hammer of justice didn't fall softly. It crashed down with the weight of a North Carolina Superior Court judge. By 0900 hours the next morning, my lawyer, Margaret Crane, had secured an emergency protective order. With the video evidence and the documented financial fraud, the judge didn't hesitate. He granted immediate exclusive possession of the residence to my mother and ordered Gary to stay at least 500 yards away from both of us. At 10:30, a police cruiser pulled up to the house. It was a civil standby. Two officers stood with their arms crossed on the front lawn, watching as Gary frantically threw his clothes into garbage bags. He was only allowed to take personal effects, clothing, toiletries, nothing else. The truck? Frozen by the court as a marital asset pending the fraud investigation. The bank accounts? Frozen. The safe? Empty. I stood by the living room window with Mom, watching him. He looked small. Without his bluster, without his ability to terrorize, he was just a middle-aged man in stained sweatpants, dragging trash bags to a taxi because he didn't even have a car anymore. He looked up at the window once. I expected anger. Instead, I saw fear. He knew for the first time in his life that he was truly alone. As the taxi drove away, Mom let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for 10 years. He's gone, she whispered. He's really gone. Yes, I said, squeezing her shoulder. And he's never coming back. The air in the house felt different, lighter. For the first time, the sunlight streaming through the window didn't feel like an intruder. It felt like a guest. But the fallout wasn't over. Tyler was the next domino to fall. News of the rehearsal dinner disaster had spread through Fayetteville like wildfire. In a military town, reputation is everything. By noon, Tyler had been fired from his consulting gig, which was really just a nepotism hire by one of Gary's drinking buddies. At 2:05 p.m., there was a banging on the front door. I opened it to find Tyler. He looked like a wreck. His eyes were bloodshot, his shirt was untucked, and he reeked of stale bourbon. "Denise," he slurred, leaning against the doorframe. "You gotta help me. Sarah blocked me. My boss fired me. My landlord is kicking me out tomorrow if I don't pay rent." He looked at me with those puppy dog eyes that had worked on Mom for 26 years. "You got that bonus money, right?" he pleaded. "Just a loan, sis. I'll pay you back, I promise. I'm your brother." I looked at him. I didn't see a brother. I saw a 26-year-old man who was still acting like a 6-year-old waiting for a handout. "No, Tyler," I said calmly. "What?" He blinked, confused. But I have nowhere to go." "Then figure it out," I said. "You wanted to be a big shot? You wanted to be the golden child? Well, welcome to the real world. In the real world, you don't get bailed out when you assault people and steal from your mother." "You're heartless," he spat. "No," I said, stepping back to close the door. "I'm teaching you the only lesson Gary never did. It's called accountability." I slammed the door in his face. I locked the deadbolt. That night, the police scanner app on my phone chirped. DUI crash on Skibo Road. Suspect identified as Tyler Holton. Hit a utility pole. He was alive, but he was in custody. He wouldn't be bothering us for a while. One down, one to go. I knew Gary wouldn't fade away quietly. Narcissists don't accept defeat, they seek revenge. So, I prepared. I spent the next week turning Mom's house into a fortress. I installed motion sensor floodlights. I upgraded the alarm system. And I waited. It happened 7 days later. It was 2:01 a.m. on a Tuesday. A moonless, humid night. I was sleeping on the couch in the living room, fully dressed, my expandable baton resting on the coffee table. Beep, beep, beep. The perimeter alarm on the back door chirped softly. It wasn't the loud siren. I had set it to silent alert so I wouldn't panic Mom. I sat up instantly. My heart rate spiked, but my mind was ice cold. I checked the camera feed on my phone. There he was, Gary. He was stumbling around the back patio, wearing dark clothes that were too tight for him. He was holding a crowbar. He looked drunk, angry, and dangerous. He jammed the crowbar into the frame of the sliding glass door. He pushed. The lock groaned. According to North Carolina's castle doctrine, I could have shot him the moment he breached that door. I had my service weapon in the safe. It would have been legal. It would have been easy. But I didn't want his blood on my floor. I wanted him to suffer a fate worse than death for a man like him. I wanted him to be humiliated by the system he thought he could outsmart. I grabbed my baton. I flicked it open. Click, clack, a solid bar of steel. I moved to the shadows of the kitchen, pressing my back against the refrigerator. Crack! The glass door shattered. Gary reached in, unlocked the latch, and slid the door open. He stepped into the kitchen. He was breathing heavily, muttering to himself. "Bitch! Think you can take my house? I'll show you." He took 2 steps. That was all he got. I stepped out of the shadows. "Police! Drop the weapon!" I shouted, my voice booming in the small kitchen. Gary spun around, raising the crowbar. He was slow, clumsy, drunk. I didn't hesitate. I swung the baton low, striking his right forearm, the radial nerve motor point. Thwack! Gary screamed and dropped the crowbar. It clattered loudly on the linoleum. Before he could recover, I spun him around, kicked the back of his knee, and drove him face first into the floor. Slam. "Stay down!" I yelled, pressing my knee into the small of his back. I grabbed his right arm and twisted it behind him in a compliance lock. "Get off me!" he howled, thrashing like a fish on a hook. "This is my house." "Not anymore, Gary," I whispered into his ear. "You are under arrest for breaking and entering, assault with a deadly weapon, and violation of a protective order. The sirens were already wailing in the distance. I had triggered the silent police alarm the moment he stepped on the porch. Within minutes, the kitchen was swarming with uniforms. This time, Officer Ruiz wasn't there, but the officers who arrived knew exactly who I was. They knew about the EPO. They hauled Gary up. His nose was bleeding from hitting the floor. His hands were cuffed tightly behind his back. As they dragged him out the front door, he saw Mom standing at the top of the stairs in her bathrobe. "Linda!" he screamed, desperate now. "Linda, tell them to let me go. I'm your husband." Mom looked down at him. She didn't tremble. She didn't look away. She simply tightened the belt of her robe and said, "My husband died 10 years ago. You're just the mistake I finally fixed." The officers shoved him into the back of the squad car. He kicked the window, screaming curses, blaming everyone but himself. I stood on the porch with Mom, watching the red and blue lights flash against the oak trees. The engine started. The car pulled away, taking the noise, the anger, and the toxicity with it. As the taillights faded into the darkness, the only sound left was the chirping of crickets and the steady rhythm of our own breathing. "It's over, Mom," I said, putting my arm around her. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Yes," she said. "It's finally over." We went back inside and locked the door. But this time, we weren't locking ourselves in a prison. We were locking the world out of our sanctuary. Gary was gone. Tyler was gone. The parasites had been purged, and for the first time in a long time, I slept without a weapon within reach. 3 months later, the North Carolina sky was a piercing, brilliant blue. Not a cloud dared to mar the perfection of the morning at Fort Liberty. The parade deck was filled with the crisp sound of boots snapping to attention and the flutter of the American flag in the gentle breeze. I stood center stage, my spine straight as a rod, facing Colonel Alden. "Attention to orders," the adjutant bellowed over the PA system. The crowd fell silent. "The President of the United States has reposed special trust and confidence in the patriotism, valor, fidelity, and abilities of Captain Denise Hall," the voice boomed. "In view of these qualities and her demonstrated potential for increased responsibility, she is, therefore, promoted to the rank of Major in the United States Army." Colonel Alden stepped forward. He held a small velvet box in his hand. Inside gleamed the gold oak leaf insignia, the mark of a field-grade officer. He smiled, a genuine fatherly smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "You earned this, Denise," he said quietly, so only I could hear. "Not just for what you did in uniform, but for the battle you won out of it." He removed my old captain's bars and pinned the new gold oak leaves onto my collar. I felt the weight of them. It was a physical weight, yes, but it felt different than the burdens I had carried for so long. For years, I had carried the weight of Gary's insults. I'd carried the weight of Tyler's failures. I'd carried the weight of my mother's unhappiness. Those weights were heavy, suffocating, and cold. This weight, this was warm. This was the weight of honor. The weight of glory. The weight of a future I had carved out with my own 2 hands. "Thank you, sir," I said, my voice steady. I turned to face the audience. Usually, at a promotion ceremony, you look for your spouse, your kids, maybe your dad. I looked for the woman in the front row. Mom was sitting there. But she wasn't the woman I remembered from that dark, beer-stained living room 3 months ago. She wasn't the woman hunched over a pile of debt. She was wearing a bright yellow sundress that matched the sunshine. Her hair was cut in a stylish bob. She was sitting upright, her hands clasped in her lap, beaming. When our eyes met, she didn't look away in shame. She waved, a small, proud wave. We had sold the house on Oak Street, the House of Horrors, as we called it now. It sold quickly, the market being what it was. We used the money to pay off every single cent of the fraudulent debt Gary had racked up. The credit card companies were satisfied. The bank closed the foreclosure file. With the remaining equity, Mom bought a small 2-bedroom condo in a quiet community just 10 minutes from the base. It had a balcony where she grew tomatoes and basil. She had joined a local garden club. She went to brunch with friends on Sundays. She was 55 years old, and for the first time in her adult life, she was free. Seeing her smile, that was my real promotion. That was the medal I would wear on my heart forever. After the ceremony, the crowd dispersed for refreshments, but I had one last duty. A platoon of new military police graduates was waiting in formation. They were young, fresh-faced, eager to serve. They looked at me with awe, seeing the gold oak leaves, seeing the bronze star. I walked up to them. "At ease," I commanded. They relaxed their stance, but their eyes stayed glued to me. "You are all entering a profession of arms," I began, my voice carrying across the grass without a microphone. "You have been trained to shoot. You have been trained to fight. You have been trained to identify the enemy." I paused, looking at a young female private in the front row. She reminded me of myself at 20. "But I am here to tell you that the enemy isn't always wearing a different uniform," I said. "The enemy isn't always on a battlefield thousands of miles away. Sometimes the enemy is hiding in the places you trust the most. Sometimes the enemy shares your last name." A few of them blinked, surprised by the raw honesty. "Your strength," I placed my hand over my heart, tapping the fabric of my uniform, "does not come from the weapon on your hip. It comes from here. It comes from the discipline to say no when it's easier to say yes. It comes from the courage to protect the vulnerable, even if it breaks your heart to do it." I looked at them, channeling every ounce of conviction I had. Never let anyone, not a partner, not a parent, not a sibling, compromise your integrity. You are guardians of justice. Start by guarding your own souls. "Hooah!" the platoon roared in unison. "Dismissed," I said. I walked away toward the parking lot. The sun was beginning to dip, painting the sky in streaks of gold and violet. I got into my new car, a sensible sedan, fully paid for. I rolled down the windows as I drove off base, letting the warm Carolina breeze whip through my hair. I thought about Gary. He was currently sitting in a cell at the Cumberland County Detention Center, awaiting trial. His lawyer had tried to get him bail, but with no fixed address and a history of flight risk, the judge denied it. I thought about Tyler. He was in court-ordered rehab as part of his DUI plea deal. Maybe he would get clean, maybe he wouldn't. But that wasn't my burden to carry anymore. I drove past the sign that said, "Welcome to Fayetteville." I wasn't angry anymore. The rage that had fueled me for months had burned itself out, leaving behind a clean, quiet landscape. I was Denise Hall, Major, daughter, protector. I had fought in deserts. I had fought in cities. But the hardest war I ever fought was the one inside my own living room. And I had won. I looked in the rearview mirror. Behind me, flying high above the base entrance, the American flag snapped proudly in the wind. Old Glory. It had survived storms, wars, and time. Just like me. I smiled, turned up the radio, and drove home to have dinner with my mother. This is Major Denise Hall, signing off. Thank you for listening to my story. If you believe that family is about loyalty and love, not just blood, please hit that subscribe button. Share this story with someone who might need to hear it. And remember, you are stronger than you think. Stand your ground.